Alrighty, guys. Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm a little rusty at this, but let's go ahead and hit it. I've always wondered a couple of things about nukes in FAF. So I'm going to go figure a bunch of them out, and I figured I'd share them with y'all as well. So let's go on a journey of big booms, explosions, and since, blowing things up is really, really cool. Okay, so we're going to be covering three different questions. First one, how many nuke launchers do you need to overwhelm a single SMD? I'm really surprised that I haven't done a video on this before. I think I've meant to do a video on this a couple of different times, but because I'm essentially like the dog in Up, I get distracted, and every single time I've meant to do a video on this, it has turned into something else. So the initial answer is super easy, right? It's two. The harder one is if you build a nuke launcher and then realize they have an SMD and then decide to build another nuke launcher. How long does it take for two nuke launchers to break through a single SMD? This one has been inspired by the most recent couple of casts I've done, where completely unintentionally, I didn't realize this going into either of these casts, but one team in both instances went with a strategy of heavy nuclear missile launchers with varying degrees of success. So here's kind of how I tested it. I built a nuke launcher and an SMD at exactly the same time, where they finished at exactly the same time. Then I let them build their respective payloads. Now it takes 5 minutes to build a nuke. It takes 4 minutes to build an anti-nuke. So if they're built at the same time, then there will be a counter nuke loaded. So as soon as the nuke launcher is done, fired my first nuke. So 5 minutes, it was an anti-nuke, got shot down. Now, whenever it got shot down, I kind of pretended like I was a player. It's like, oh, they have an SMD. I obviously need to build another nuke launcher to overwhelm that SMD. And then I measured how long it took for two nuke launchers to overwhelm the SMD, assuming that you didn't know there was an SMD. Before everybody goes into, I guess, the comments, starts talking, I'm well aware that this is not a perfect test. But there are variables that are impossible to be controlled for. So whenever you're doing an experiment, you want to try and control for as many variables as possible. Some of the ones that I'm unable to control for is when the nuke launcher is built in an actual game, and then when the SMD is actually built. So it's pretty rare that two players are going to finish those things at exactly the same time. Whether there are mass or power stalls that come into play. So those also need to be taken into account. The way that I ran these tests is assuming unlimited resources. It's the way that I run all of my tests. And honestly, I have a life and I don't feel like spending 4+ hours running tests to account for every single variable out there. So I know it's not perfect, but this is what you guys got. So in the test, it takes about 15 minutes for two nuke launchers to overwhelm a single SMD under our current conditions, which is not great, but if it works, then why not? So a couple reasons why you wouldn't want to do this, at least in my opinion. The main reason is why not is that you spent almost 5 times as much mass to make those two nuke launchers as your opponent did on the SMD. And that doesn't take into account how much was even spent to make the payloads, because the payloads that a nuke launcher makes, so the actual nuclear weapon, takes about 40 mass per second to build, and then 15 mass per second to build an anti-nuke. So building nukes is just by and large more expensive across the board than it is building an SMD, massively so. The other thing is that if you launch a nuke and then you're launching another nuke and then another nuke, which I think it took 3 or 4 nukes to actually break through the SMD, your opponent is probably going to realize this and probably build a second SMD for much cheaper than it took to build your nuke launchers. So honestly, if this happens to you, the two things I would recommend are just use your nukes for point defense, or just turn them off and reclaim them. Honestly, I wouldn't try and overwhelm a player that already has an SMD, because they will be able to build more anti-nukes faster, cheaper than you are going to be able to build nuclear weapons. Okay, so this is one that I've kind of always wondered, which is, do shields have any effect on nuke damage? And if I was cheating and was able to just stack buildings on top of each other, could I have enough shields that would completely mitigate the nuclear weapon that is actually detonating? And as part of this, I actually went down a little bit of a rabbit hole to see if modern day physics has devised a way to do some sort of energy shield. Long story short, the first thing I ran into was kind of funny. I'll throw a screenshot up on the screen because I thought it was hilarious. But apparently all you have to do in order to create an energy shield is imagine yourself in a quote cobalt blue egg, circle of love, roses, and so on. And then you create an energy shield for yourself. So yeah, apparently Googling do energy shields exist is going to yield some really interesting results. But going back to reality here, there is some really early research that shows that certain types of shielding from like an energy perspective may someday be possible to block certain types of radiation, such as heat, microwave, and others based on the actual frequency of the energy that is being emitted. I have very little experience in physics, so I'm not going to try and get into this, but looks like some really smart people have come up with some ways, at least theoretically, that it could be possible. And the main limit right now is energy generation, because it's going to take a hell of a lot of energy to actually produce these magnetic shielding or the other things that were mentioned in the various scientific articles that I read. But going back to FAF, shield HP can vary pretty wildly. So we've got 16.5 K HP for the Cybran, up to 21,000 HP for the Seraphim for the Tech 3 heavy shields. So the questions that we have to ask are, can a shield mitigate the 500 damage from the outer ring of a nuclear explosion? So if you if you select your nuke launcher and click it to launch, you'll notice two distinct rings. The inner ring deals 70,000 damage. The outer ring deals 500 damage. To kind of mimic explosion, I guess, damage reduction. And if one shield can mitigate the 500 damage from the outer ring, is it possible to just stack shields on top of each other to mitigate the full 70,000 damage that a nuclear weapon deals? And the results are that shielding seems to have absolutely no effect on the damage from a nuke. And that damage seems to just be calculated straight up, regardless of whether the unit is under a shield or outside of a shield. And my theory as to why this actually happens, because I always like to give some sort of explanation around why a particular mechanic works, at least to the best of my ability, is that shields only work on simulated projectiles. So for anyone that may not know, projectiles in FAF are fully simulated, which means they are separate objects to the game engine, and their behavior is calculated by the computer independently. So I think this is how this works. I'm not an expert in this, but if you don't use simulated projectiles, it is simply just a straight damage calculation. Like Archer deals 10 damage, fires, and regardless of whether that missile hits or not, it always deals 10 damage. So that is a non-simulated projectile. The computer is simply taking into account whether a unit has attacked another unit and then is subtracting the variables, or is subtracting the variable health based on the variable damage. Now in Forge Alliance Forever, simulated projectiles and a lot of modern RTSs are going to work like this, where units can actually miss. It also allows you to do things like firing randomness. So artillery is able to like have ricochets off of one off of one shield onto another shield. So it allows you to do a lot of cool things from a realism perspective. But the nuke damage, I don't think, is calculated as a projectile. And the reason why is because it would have to be thousands of projectiles radiating out from the source of the explosion to emulate that effect, without missing like a mech marine or maybe some other small unit on the fringes of the outside of the ring. So in order to do this, you would have to have several thousand of these projectiles be essentially simulated in real time immediately. And we all see how much the Forged Alliance Forever or just Forged Alliance engine chugs whenever you're dealing with large air engagements where you have 150 ASF on 150 ASF. So my thinking is that instead of making this be a simulated projectile based damage, it is instead just a flat damage value that gets applied to anything within that radius, regardless of any damage mitigation that might be in the way. The team that built the engine might also have thought that it would be a huge waste of time to have shields mitigate nuke damage, because in the great words of Billy Bob Thornton, that would be like shooting a BB gun at a freight train. So I'm no expert at game development or even simulating projectiles like in Blender or anything like that. But from my limited knowledge, this is why I believe that shields don't even protect from the 500 damage, even though they have more than enough shielding capacity to be able to do so. And that about rounds it out for weird behavior with nukes or questions that I've had or anything like that. So let me know in the comments how you guys think I did. If you've got a topic that you would like me to cover in a future science video, go ahead and drop it down there as well. I try to read the comments and incorporate any suggestions to the best of my ability. So yeah, if you got something you want me to cover or something you think I missed, please let me know down there, and I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.